3 o'clock Monday afternoon. Lily Carter steps through the iron gates of the Moretti mansion, her cleaning supplies clutched against her chest, her heart pounding at the sight of men in black suits with guns barely concealed beneath their jackets. But it is not the armed guards that make her blood run cold. It is the sound that tears through the massive estate, the desperate, gut-wrenching cries of 2 babies that echo off every marble wall. At 27 years old, Lily has been working as a housekeeper here for 3 weeks, sent by an agency to replace the 6th maid who quit out of sheer terror. 3 weeks, and she still cannot get used to that sound. The twins have been crying for 4 hours straight today. Yesterday it was 6 hours. The day before, 7. "Dear God, those poor little angels," she whispers, pausing in the grand foyer to catch her breath, her fingers unconsciously tracing the faded scar on her left arm, a permanent reminder of a husband who nearly destroyed her. Gabriel Moretti appears at the top of the staircase like a man who has lost everything. At 36 years old, the head of the most powerful Mafia family in Chicago, looks like he has aged a decade in just 4 months. Dark circles carve deep hollows beneath his eyes. His jaw is covered in days of stubble. His usually immaculate suit is wrinkled beyond recognition, and he walks like a ghost haunting his own home. They say he has killed men with his bare hands without flinching. Yet here he stands, utterly broken by 2 tiny babies he cannot comfort. It has been over 4 months since anyone in this house has slept properly. 4 months of endless crying. 4 months of hell. Harold, the 55-year-old butler who has served the Moretti family for 25 years, shakes his head with deep sorrow as he scribbles notes into his worn leather journal, documenting everything as he always does. "Sir, you need rest. You cannot continue like this. You will collapse." "Rest," Gabriel laughs bitterly, the sound hollow and empty. "How can I rest when my daughters are screaming like they are being tortured? What kind of father am I? What kind of man lets his children suffer like this?" Lily freezes on the marble floor, the raw agony in his voice piercing straight through her chest. She knows that pain. She knows it intimately. 2 years ago, she was 5 months pregnant when her ex-husband Derek beat her so badly that she lost her baby boy, the son she was going to name Michael, the child she never got to hold. She understands what it means to watch a helpless creature suffer and be powerless to stop it. Gabriel grabs his phone with trembling hands, calling the doctor again, his voice cracking as he begs for answers, for solutions, for anything. But the response from the other end only deepens his despair. They do not know what else to do. Pediatricians, neurologists, sleep specialists, even a child psychologist have examined the twins. He has spent over $2 million and nothing works. Nothing. He ends the call and slams his fist into the wall so hard the plaster cracks. Harold rushes toward him, urging him not to hurt himself. "It is useless, Harold." Gabriel growls through clenched teeth. "I am a useless father. I cannot even make my own daughters stop crying. I could not protect their mother, and now I cannot protect them." Lily watches everything with her heart shattering into pieces. She has never seen a man so completely destroyed, not even the monsters in her own past. His pain is real, raw, visceral, the kind that cuts down to the bone. And in that moment, something stirs inside her, something she thought died the night she lost her son. The cries of the twins grow louder from the nursery upstairs. Bella and Sophia, 4 months old, fighting against something no one can understand, crying for a mother who will never come home, for comfort that no amount of money can buy. "If things do not improve soon," Gabriel whispers, his voice breaking into 1,000 pieces, "I do not know how much longer I can survive this. If you want to know what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who loves a good drama. And stay tuned, because what Lily does next will change everything." At 3:30 in the afternoon that same day, Lily tried to focus on her cleaning duties, but the cries of the 2 babies kept drilling into her mind like needles piercing flesh. She pushed the cleaning cart along the second-floor corridor, where the expensive oil paintings hanging on the walls seemed to share the same heavy gloom as the house itself. Harold passed by with his familiar notebook in hand, paused for a second to look at her, then sighed and said she should clean the baby's room today because the master had just taken them to the hospital for a follow-up check, and they probably wouldn't be back for about an hour. Lily nodded and wheeled the cart toward the last room at the end of the hallway, the one with the pale pink door decorated with shimmering silver stars. She opened the door and stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the mixed scent of baby powder and medicine. 2 tiny cribs sat side by side, and toys lay untouched, never used because the babies never stopped crying long enough to play. Lily began wiping down the changing table, then the wardrobe, then the small bookshelf filled with picture books the babies wouldn't be able to read for years. When she reached up to dust a higher shelf, Her elbow accidentally struck a glass perfume bottle balanced precariously at the edge, and it fell, shattering across the wooden floor with a sharp, jarring crash. "Oh God," Lily gasped, dropping to her knees to gather the jagged shards as the heavy scent of roses rushed into her nose. That was when she heard hurried footsteps on the stairs, the heart-tearing cry of a child, and then Gabriel's voice roaring to ask what had happened here. He stormed into the room holding Bella, the baby crying so hard her face had turned deep purple, tears streaming down her tiny flushed cheeks. Behind him, Sophia lay in Harold's arms, wailing just as desperately as her sister. Gabriel saw the broken glass on the floor and his face darkened, but before he could say anything, something strange happened. Lily was still kneeling on the floor, her hands unconsciously reaching out toward Bella as if an invisible thread were pulling her toward the suffering child, and she whispered to ask if she could hold the baby for a moment. Gabriel froze, exhaustion and despair draining him of the strength to argue or even think, and he simply placed Bella into Lily's arms like a drowning man clutching at whatever floated within reach. Then silence fell like a miracle. Bella stopped crying instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch inside her. Her eyes opened, red and swollen from so much crying, but she didn't cry anymore. She just stared at Lily's face with a strange, intent curiosity. Sophia, in Harold's arms, suddenly went quiet too, turning her head toward her sister and toward the unfamiliar woman holding her. Harold nearly dropped the baby in shock, stammering that, "Oh God, what was this?" Gabriel stood as if turned to stone, his eyes so wide they looked ready to fall from their sockets, unable to believe what he was seeing. Lily gently rocked Bella in her arms, a maternal instinct she thought had died with the son she never got to bring into the world surging back to life. She whispered soft lullabies she had once prepared to sing to Michael, the son she never had the chance to hold. "Shh, my sweet one. It's all right now. I'm here." Bella closed her eyes, her tiny fingers clutching the hem of Lily's clothes, and for the first time in 4 months, she drifted into real sleep. Harold hurried to place Sophia into her crib, and miraculously, the baby slowly closed her eyes and fell asleep as well. The room sank into a suffocating stillness. Gabriel slowly collapsed onto the floor, his back against the wall, his shoulders shaking not with anger but with something he couldn't name. Maybe relief, maybe hope, maybe both. He looked at Lily holding the sleeping Bella and asked in a hoarse voice how she had done it. Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, and said she didn't know. She just felt like holding the baby. That was all. Harold scribbled frantically into his notebook, his hands trembling so badly the writing became an unreadable scrawl, whispering that in 25 years of working for the Moretti family, he had never witnessed anything like this. But no one in that room realized that another pair of eyes was watching them through the narrow crack of the half-open door, cold eyes burning with jealousy and hatred. Victoria Ashford pushed the door open and stepped into the nursery just as Gabriel was sitting on the floor, staring at Lily holding the sleeping Bella with an expression she had never seen on his face in 5 years. She had been standing outside the door watching everything from the beginning, from the moment that insignificant maid reached out to take the crying baby to the instant both infants fell asleep as if under a spell. Her heart tightened, as though someone were crushing it when she saw the smile on Gabriel's lips, the first smile he had shown in 4 months, a smile that should have been meant for her, and not for some lowly servant who had come from nowhere. Victoria cleared her throat and walked into the room with the polished smile she had practiced thousands of times. She said she was there to check on the baby's health as scheduled, and asked what had happened here because she heard the babies had just returned from the hospital. Gabriel stood up, his face still dazed by what had just occurred, pointed toward Lily, and said that Victoria wouldn't believe it. She made the babies stop crying. For the first time in 4 months, they were sleeping peacefully like this. Victoria felt as if a knife had just been driven into her chest, but she kept the smile on her lips, stepped closer to the crib where Sophia was sleeping, and pretended to check the baby's breathing, while her eyes flicked toward Lily with an icy glare. "Truly miraculous," she said in a falsely sweet voice. "But Gabriel, do you actually know anything about this woman? How long has she worked here?" 3 weeks, right. And do you know her background?" Gabriel frowned. He had never thought about it because he had been too exhausted to think about anything other than how to make his daughters stop crying. Victoria spotted the opening and slid right into it. She lowered her voice and said she didn't want to ruin this pleasant moment, but as a doctor, she had to warn him that newborns were extremely vulnerable, and there were many ways to make a baby stop crying, not all of them safe. Lily lifted her head and looked at Victoria. She could feel the hostility radiating from the woman even though she didn't understand why. She was just a maid, and she hadn't done anything wrong. Gabriel looked at Victoria in confusion and asked what she was implying. Victoria shrugged innocently and said she was only thinking about Bella and Sophia's safety. She had been this family's doctor for 5 years. She knew how much Gabriel loved the babies, and she only wanted to be sure the person caring for them was trustworthy. Harold stood in the corner of the room, observing everything with the sharp eyes of someone who had lived too long not to recognize the scent of jealousy. He wrote a few lines in his notebook without saying a word. Gabriel remained silent for a long moment, then nodded. He said Victoria was right. He would have someone thoroughly investigate Lily's background. But for now, the important thing was that the babies were asleep, and he didn't want to wake them. Victoria smiled in triumph, but hid it quickly. She said she completely agreed, and would return tomorrow to check the babies more carefully. She wanted to make sure this sleep was natural, and not caused by any outside influence. Victoria's words sliced through the air like a blade, implying that Lily might have done something improper to make the babies sleep. Lily felt the blood rush to her face, but she didn't dare say anything. She was only a maid, and she knew her place in this house. Victoria turned and walked out of the room, but before leaving, she glanced back at Lily one last time with eyes as cold as steel, a silent warning that the battle had only just begun. 2 days after that miraculous night, Gabriel summoned Lily to his study on the first floor, the room she had never been allowed to enter since she started working there. Lily stepped through the heavy oak door with her heart pounding, unsure whether she had done something wrong or whether he intended to dismiss her after what Victoria had implied the other day. Gabriel sat behind his polished black wooden desk, dark circles still shadowing his eyes, but the desperation was gone. And when he looked up at her, Lily realized it was the first time he was truly seeing her as a human being, rather than an invisible shadow cleaning his house. "Sit down," Gabriel said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Lily sat, her hands resting on her thighs, trying not to show how badly she was trembling. Gabriel remained silent for a moment, as if weighing every word, then said directly that he wanted her to become Bella and Sophia's private nanny. He would pay her 10 times her current salary, and she would live in the villa to care for the babies 24 hours a day. Lily's mouth fell open in shock. She never expected the meeting to take that turn. She stammered that she was only a maid. She had no degrees or professional childcare experience. Gabriel waved his hand as if brushing aside her concerns. He said he had hired dozens of certified experts and none of them had been able to do what she did. For the past 2 nights, Bella and Sophia had slept peacefully whenever she was near them, and that was all he needed. Lily bit her lip and glanced around the luxurious room with its expensive paintings and the gun collection mounted on the wall. She knew whose house this was. She knew who the men in black suits outside were, and she was afraid. She took a deep breath and spoke honestly, saying she wasn't sure she could live in this house. She knew who he was. She knew what the Moretti family was, and she was just an ordinary woman who wanted a quiet life. Gabriel studied her for a long moment, then unexpectedly asked if she knew Derek Lawson. Lily went pale as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over her. She trembled as she asked how he knew that name. Gabriel opened a file folder on his desk and slid it toward her. He said he had people investigate her as Victoria suggested, and he knew everything. He knew about the abusive marriage, about the child she had lost, about the $50,000 debt her ex-husband had left with Frank Castellano's gang. Lily felt as though the ground beneath her was collapsing. She never imagined her past would be laid bare like this. Tears spilled down her face as she whispered what he intended to do with that information. Gabriel stood, walked around the desk, and sat in the chair beside her. In a low, steady voice, he said he didn't intend to do anything at all. He only wanted to offer her a deal. If she agreed to stay and care for his daughters, he would erase her entire debt to Frank Castellano and ensure that Derek Lawson would never be able to touch her again. Lily lifted her head and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes, unable to believe what she was hearing. She asked why he would help her like this when she was just a maid. Gabriel looked out the window, his gaze distant. He said his wife died giving birth to the twins. He had sworn to protect his daughters at any cost. Yet for 4 months he had failed. He had watched them cry and been powerless to help. And now that someone had finally brought them peace, he was willing to pay any price. Lily closed her eyes. Derek's face, twisted with rage, flashed through her mind. The threatening messages he sent her every night. The times she had been forced to change places because she feared he would find her. She knew she couldn't keep running forever. She opened her eyes, looked at Gabriel, and nodded. She said she agreed, but she had one condition. She wanted him to promise he would never force her to do anything illegal. Gabriel smiled, a rare gentle smile on his otherwise cold face, and said she only needed to care for his daughters. That was all he asked. And just like that, Lily Carter officially stepped into the dangerous world of the Moretti family, unaware that this decision would change her life forever. That night, after Lily had agreed to stay, and Harold had escorted her to her new room on the second floor near the twins' nursery. Tony Russo knocked on Gabriel's study door with a thick file in his hands. Gabriel motioned for his right-hand man to enter. He was seated behind his desk with a glass of whiskey in front of him, his eyes fixed on the photograph of his late wife hanging on the wall. Tony set the file down and said he had dug deeper as Gabriel requested, and there was information Gabriel needed to know immediately. Gabriel opened the file and began to read, his face darkening with every page he turned. Tony explained that Derek Lawson, Lily's ex-husband, didn't just owe money to Frank Castellano. He had once worked for Frank's organization as a courier for illegal goods, and the $50,000 debt was actually money from stolen merchandise that Derek had pocketed before disappearing. Gabriel reached the final line of the report, and his hand clenched so tightly the paper crumpled. Frank Castellano was the man who had orchestrated Serena's poisoning while she was pregnant, the man who had killed his wife. Tony looked at his boss with concern and said this might be a coincidence. Lily Carter appeared to know nothing about the connection between her ex-husband and Frank, but it was also possible she had been placed here for a purpose. Gabriel rose and walked to the window, staring out into the pitch-black night, then ordered Tony to bring Lily to the study immediately. 10 minutes later, Lily appeared at the doorway with a worried expression and damp hair from her shower. She was led inside, and the door closed behind her with a cold click. Gabriel turned to her with eyes sharp as blades and asked if she knew who Frank Castellano was. Lily shook her head and said she only knew Derek owed money to some gang, but she had never met them or known their names. Gabriel stepped closer until she could smell the whiskey on his breath and said Frank Castellano was the man who killed his wife, and her ex-husband had worked for him. Lily stumbled back a step as if punched in the chest, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She stammered that she didn't know. She swore to God she didn't know anything about this. Derek had never told her what he did or who he owed. Gabriel studied her face for a long time. He had lived in the underworld his entire life and knew how to recognize lies, and there was nothing in Lily's eyes that suggested deceit. He told her to tell him everything about Derek Lawson, from beginning to end, leaving nothing out. Lily collapsed into the nearest chair, her shoulders trembling as tears streamed down her face, and she began to recount her marriage from hell. She met Derek when she was 22. At the time, he seemed like the perfect man, polite and charming, but everything changed right after the wedding. Derek began beating her for no reason at all. When the food was slightly cold, when the house wasn't clean enough, when she spoke to anyone. She pulled up her sleeve to reveal a long scar on her arm and said it was from the time Derek slashed her with a knife because she dared to look at another man on the street. Gabriel stared at the scar, and his jaw tightened. Lily went on to say that when she was 5 months pregnant, she thought things might improve because Derek seemed pleased by the news. But one night he came home drunk and beat her until she lay motionless on the floor in a pool of blood. She lost her son, the child she planned to name Michael, the baby she never got the chance to hold. Her voice broke as she said that after that night she ran away, filed for divorce, and tried to rebuild her life. But Derek found her and threatened to kill her if she didn't pay the debt he left behind. Gabriel stood silent for a long time, then did something Lily never expected. He sat down in the chair across from her and said in a low, steady voice that he believed her. He had seen enough to know she wasn't a spy or a traitor. She was just a woman who had endured far too much suffering. He promised that from this moment on, she would be protected, and Derek Lawson would never be able to touch her again. 2 weeks passed like a dream Lily never dared to imagine. The Moretti mansion still had men in black suits with guns hidden beneath their jackets, still carried the heavy atmosphere of an underground empire. But to Lily it was slowly becoming something she had never truly had in her life. A home. Bella and Sophia changed as if reborn. The babies who once cried day and night now began to smile whenever Lily stepped into the room, their clear eyes lighting up like 2 tiny stars. Harold wrote in his notebook that this was the first time he had heard the twins laugh since the day they were born, and he added that this miracle could only have been created by one person. Gabriel no longer looked like a ghost. The dark circles beneath his eyes gradually faded. His suits became neat again, and he finally had the strength to return to managing the family's affairs. But there was one change he did not notice. He was spending more and more time watching Lily from a distance as she played with his daughters, his gaze following every gentle movement as she rocked them to sleep. Every smile she gave when Bella wrapped her tiny fingers around Lily's hand and refused to let go. One evening, after the babies had fallen soundly asleep, Gabriel and Lily happened to meet in the 2nd floor hallway. He asked if she wanted to have tea because he could not sleep, and Lily nodded without knowing why. They sat in the small upstairs sitting room, soft yellow light falling over 2 faces marked by the scars of the past. Gabriel suddenly asked if she ever thought about the child she had lost. Lily was quiet for a moment, then nodded. She said there was not a single day she did not think about Michael. that she still imagined what he might have been like if he had been born, whose eyes he would have had, whose smile. Gabriel looked down at the cup of tea in his hands and said he understood that feeling. He thought about Serena every day too, about what she should have been able to see. Their daughter's first laughter, their first steps. They sat there in silence for a long time, needing no more words because they understood each other's pain better than anything language could express. But while Lily and Gabriel were slowly drawing closer during those long nights of quiet conversation, another pair of eyes was watching everything with growing hatred. Victoria Ashford came to the mansion twice a week to check on the babies as usual, but in truth she came to observe, to remember, to look for any opportunity to remove Lily from Gabriel's life. She saw the way Gabriel looked at Lily, the way he smiled when listening to her talk about the twins' small mischiefs, and each glance felt like a knife driven into her heart. That night, Victoria sat in her car parked in a dark alley on the outskirts of Chicago. Across from her sat a thin man with dull eyes clouded by alcohol and drugs. Derek Lawson looked at her suspiciously and asked what she wanted from him, and why a woman like her would even know who he was. Victoria smiled coldly, placed a thick envelope of cash on the steering wheel, and said she knew he was looking for his ex-wife, and she could tell him exactly where she was. Derek looked at the envelope, then back at Victoria, and asked what she wanted in return. Victoria took out a photograph of Lily holding Bella in the garden of the Moretti mansion, and said she only wanted that woman gone from one man's life, and if Derek helped her do that, she would pay him $100,000 and erase his entire debt to Frank Castellano. Derek lifted the photograph and stared at it, his eyes darkening with hatred as he recognized the face of the wife who had escaped him, and he nodded in agreement without needing even one more second to think. 3 days after their first meeting, Victoria and Derek met again at a rundown bar in the southern outskirts of Chicago, a place with no security cameras, and no one who cared what two strangers might be plotting. Victoria entered the bar with a black coat pulled low over her head, choosing a shadowed corner at the back where the dim lights hid her face from curious eyes. Derek was already there with a cheap bottle of beer in front of him, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and likely something else as well. Victoria sat across from him and placed a leather briefcase on the table, opening it to reveal neatly stacked bundles of cash inside, enough to make Derek's greedy eyes light up. "This is $50,000, Victoria said in a low voice, "and you'll get the remaining $50,000 after the job is done." Derek licked his lips as he stared at the money and asked what exactly she wanted him to do to that miserable ex-wife of his. Victoria shook her head and said she didn't need Derek to do anything to Lily directly right now. She only needed him to stay quiet and wait, and she would handle everything herself in her own way. Derek frowned, clearly confused, and asked what she needed him for then. Victoria smiled darkly and explained that when everything was over, Lily would be thrown out of the Moretti mansion in disgrace. And at that point, Derek could do whatever he wanted to her with no one left to protect her. And if her plan failed, she would need Derek as a witness to accuse Lily of things she never did. Derek scoffed and said he liked this plan and would wait. But he also warned Victoria that if she tried to deceive him, he'd make her regret it. Victoria pushed the briefcase toward Derek and stood up, saying she didn't have a habit of betraying allies and he could relax and wait for good news. That night, Victoria returned to her luxurious apartment in downtown Chicago and opened the medicine cabinet in her private clinic, which she maintained alongside her role as the Moretti family doctor. She searched through hundreds of neatly arranged bottles until she found what she needed: a sedative formulated for infants, a medication whose effects and dosage she knew intimately because she had prescribed it hundreds of times throughout her career. She held the bottle up to the light, the clear liquid inside shimmering like crystal, and smiled as the perfect plan took shape in her mind. She would wait for the right moment, when Gabriel was away, then come to check on the babies as usual, and give Bella a dose of the sedative strong enough to make her fall into an unnaturally deep sleep. After that, she would hide the bottle in Lily's room and let Gabriel discover the fabricated truth for himself. No one would ever suspect a doctor who had served the Moretti family for 5 years, and every accusation would point toward the new maid, who hadn't even been there for a full month. Victoria slipped the bottle into her handbag and looked out the window at the distant glow of the city lights, whispering into the darkness that Lily Carter would soon learn what hell truly was. The opportunity Victoria had been waiting for finally arrived on a Thursday morning when Gabriel informed the household that he had to fly to New York to handle an important deal and would be away for at least 2 days. Lily was standing in the hallway holding Sophia when she heard the news, a vague unease tightening in her chest for reasons she couldn't explain. But she pushed it aside, telling herself she was worrying for nothing. Gabriel stopped in front of her before getting into the car, looked at her, and said he trusted her with his daughters, that Harold and Tony would be there if she needed anything. Lily nodded and promised she would take good care of Bella and Sophia, not knowing that it would be the last time she would see that look of trust in his eyes for a very long while. That afternoon, Victoria appeared at the mansion gates with her medical bag in hand and told Tony she was there for the baby's routine health check as scheduled. Tony had no reason to doubt the doctor who had served the family for 5 years and let her pass without another question. Victoria climbed the stairs with her heart pounding, not from anxiety but from excitement. She had prepared for this moment for days, and she wouldn't let anything stop her now. When she reached the nursery, Lily was feeding Sophia while Bella lay in her crib playing with a pink rattle. Victoria smiled sweetly and said she needed to examine Bella first, asking Lily to take Sophia into the next room so the baby wouldn't be disturbed during the check. Lily suspected nothing. She carried Sophia into the adjoining room and rocked her to sleep, leaving Victoria alone with Bella. This was the moment Victoria had been waiting for. She closed the door, swiftly pulled the sedative from her bag, drew a small dose into a syringe, and gently lifted Bella into her arms. The baby looked at her with clear, innocent eyes, unaware that the woman holding her was about to harm her. Victoria injected the medication into the baby's arm with practiced ease. Bella screamed in pain, but Victoria quickly soothed her and placed her back into the crib. The next step was to hide the evidence. Victoria left the nursery and slipped into Lily's room at the end of the hallway, opened the bedside drawer, and tucked the sedative bottle beneath a pile of clothes, making sure it would be found during a search but not so obvious as to raise immediate suspicion. She returned to the nursery just as Lily came back carrying a deeply sleeping Sophia. Victoria said Bella was perfectly fine and that she would return the following week for another check, then said goodbye to Lily with a smile only a devil could wear. 2 hours after Victoria left, Lily began to sense that something was terribly wrong with Bella. The baby, who was usually lively and quick to smile, now lay motionless in her crib, her eyes dull as if staring into nothingness. And no matter how Lily tried to rouse her, the responses were weak and sluggish. Panic seized Lily, and she called Harold upstairs. The elderly butler examined Bella with deep concern and said the baby didn't seem normal and that a doctor should be called immediately. Lily called Victoria because she was the only family doctor she knew, but Victoria didn't answer. She then called Gabriel, her voice trembling as she told him that something was wrong with Bella, that the baby wasn't responding normally and she didn't know what to do. On the other end of the line, Gabriel shouted orders for Tony to take the baby to the hospital at once and said he would return on the earliest possible flight. Lily clutched Bella to her chest, the baby limp like a rag doll, tears streaming down her face as she whispered prayers, begging God not to take her, pleading that she couldn't survive losing another child. Sophia began to cry in her crib as if sensing that something terrible was happening to her sister, and that cry echoed through the mansion like a warning of the storm about to descend. Gabriel flew back to Chicago on the last night flight, and for 4 hours in the air he didn't sleep for a single minute, his mind spiraling with the image of Bella lying motionless in Lily's arms from the video call Harold had sent him. When the plane landed at 2 o'clock in the morning, Tony was already waiting at the airport with news that Bella had been rushed to the hospital and doctors had found a sedative in her blood. They had performed detoxification and she was slowly recovering, but she was still very weak. Gabriel stormed into the hospital like a force of nature, pushed open the ward door, and saw his daughter lying on a stark white bed with intravenous lines running into her tiny arm, her face so pale he felt his heart nearly stop. Sophia was asleep in Harold's arms on a chair nearby, and Lily stood in the corner with eyes swollen from crying. She rushed toward Gabriel and said she didn't know what had happened. She swore she hadn't done anything. Gabriel didn't look at her. He went to Bella's bedside, took his daughter's small hand, and asked the doctor in a trembling voice where the sedative had come from. The attending physician explained that it was a prescription sedative for infants, something only a doctor or someone with medical knowledge would know how to administer, and if Bella had arrived at the hospital a few hours later, the consequences couldn't have been predicted. At that moment, Gabriel's phone vibrated with a call from Victoria. She spoke in a falsely concerned tone, saying she had just heard about Bella and was on her way to the hospital. But before that, she wanted to tell Gabriel something important. Earlier that afternoon, when she came to examine the babies, she noticed Lily behaving strangely and suspected that Lily's room should be checked. Gabriel ended the call and rang Tony, his voice cold as ice as he ordered him to search Lily's room immediately and report anything they found. 15 minutes later, Tony called back with a tense voice, saying they had found a bottle of sedative in Lily's bedside drawer, the exact medication the doctor had just mentioned. Lily's world collapsed in that instant. Gabriel turned to her with eyes bloodshot from rage and pain and roared, asking what she had done to his daughter. Lily shook her head frantically, tears pouring down her face as she cried that she didn't know where the bottle came from, that she swore on the soul of her lost son she would never harm Bella. Gabriel punched the hospital wall, making the entire room tremble, shouting that he had trusted her, opened his home to her, placed his daughters in her care, and this was how she repaid him. Lily fell to her knees on the cold hospital floor, clutched Gabriel's legs, and begged him to believe her, saying she loved Bella and Sophia like her own children and would never hurt them, but Gabriel kicked her away with disgust etched across his face. He ordered Tony to take her out immediately and forbade her from ever setting foot in the Moretti mansion or coming near his daughters again. Tony grabbed Lily's arm and dragged her from the ward. She struggled and screamed but couldn't break free from his iron grip. Outside the hospital, rain was pouring down relentlessly. Tony shoved Lily out the door and threw her bag onto the soaked pavement. She collapsed under the rain, tears mixing with the downpour streaming down her face as she looked up at the pitch-black sky and screamed, asking why her life had to be so cruel. Inside the ward, Sophia suddenly woke and began to scream as if she sensed Lily was gone, her cry tearing through the night and cutting deep into Gabriel's chest. Bella on the hospital bed opened her eyes as well, her lips trembling as she whispered a weak sound that everyone heard but no one dared to name. Harold stood in the corner watching everything with a thoughtful gaze. He took out his notebook and wrote a single line, that something here was wrong, and he would uncover the truth. Lily walked through the rain for 2 full hours before she finally found her way back to her old apartment in the slums of West Chicago. She had no money to call a taxi. Her phone battery had died long ago, and there was no one left she could call anyway. When she reached the door of the rundown apartment she had rented before working at the Moretti mansion, she knew immediately that something was wrong. The door was ajar, the lock had been broken, and inside the apartment was chaos, as if a storm had torn through it. Furniture was overturned, clothes were scattered across the floor, her only wardrobe had been smashed apart, and on the wall there was a crude message painted in red that said, "You can't hide forever." Lily stood frozen in the doorway, her legs shaking so badly she had to cling to the doorframe to keep from collapsing. She knew exactly who had done this. At that moment, a hand grabbed her hair from behind and yanked her backward, slamming her to the floor. Derek Lawson loomed over her with eyes bloodshot from alcohol and drugs, grinning as he said that the traitorous wife had finally come home after being thrown out of the prince's castle. Lily tried to crawl toward the door, but Derek kicked her in the stomach, doubling her over in agony. He grabbed her collar, hauled her up, and smashed his fist into her face with a crushing blow. Blood poured from her nose and mouth, but he didn't stop. He kept beating her like a rabid animal, screaming that she had run away from him, humiliated him, lived comfortably in a Mafia boss's house, while he had been forced to hide like a sewer rat. Lily had no strength left to fight back. She curled into herself, trying to protect her head as fists and kicks rained down on her body. She didn't know how long it lasted before Derek finally stopped, exhausted. He spat on her, took the last bit of money from her wallet, and left. Lily lay motionless on the cold floor, blood pooling beneath her head. She couldn't move from the pain. She closed her eyes and thought that maybe dying would be better than continuing to live like this. By sheer luck, an elderly neighbor heard the noise and called the police. They found Lily unconscious in the apartment and rushed her to the emergency room. Doctors diagnosed her with 2 broken ribs, a mild traumatic brain injury, a bruised spleen, and countless bruises covering her body. They said that if she had arrived even 30 minutes later, she wouldn't have survived. Lily lay in the hospital bed for 3 days without speaking a single word, staring at the stark white ceiling with empty eyes, as if her soul had already left her body. On the 4th day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Margaret Carter, the aunt who had taken her in when she was 16 and who had also abused her throughout her childhood, entered the room with reddened eyes and a bouquet of white carnations in her hands. Lily turned her face away and asked in a hoarse voice what she was doing there. Margaret sat in the chair beside the bed and began to cry. She said she heard about her niece's hospitalization from the police and came immediately, and when she saw Lily's injuries, she realized it was all her fault. Lily let out a bitter laugh and asked what she was talking about, because this was Derek's doing, not hers. Margaret shook her head, tears streaming down her aged face, and said that if she had treated Lily kindly from the beginning, if she had loved her like a mother instead of tormenting her like a servant, then maybe Lily wouldn't have married Derek, wouldn't have endured years of violence, wouldn't have lost her child, and wouldn't have ended up in a hospital bed like this. For the first time in 30 years of knowing her, Lily saw genuine remorse in her aunt's eyes, and she didn't know how she was supposed to feel. Margaret took Lily's hand and whispered an apology, saying she knew it came far too late, but she still had to say it. She was sorry for not loving her, sorry for making her work like a servant in her own home, sorry for failing to protect her when she needed it most. Lily closed her eyes and let tears soak into the pillow. She didn't answer, because she didn't know what there was left to say. While Lily lay in a hospital bed facing her aunt, Harold at the Moretti mansion couldn't sleep, his suspicions spinning relentlessly through his mind, night after night. He had served the Moretti family for 25 years and had seen enough to know when something wasn't right. He flipped back through his notebook and reread what he had written on the day Bella was poisoned, and he remembered clearly that Victoria had come to examine the babies that afternoon and had asked Lily to take Sophia into another room so she could be alone with Bella. Harold decided to review the mansion's security cameras. At 2 o'clock in the morning, when no one was paying attention, he entered the security control room and rewound the footage from that day. What he saw made the blood in his body run cold. Victoria had been alone with Bella in the nursery for a full 20 minutes. The distant camera angle didn't capture exactly what she was doing, but Harold could clearly see her reach into her handbag, take something out, and bend down toward Bella's crib. 20 minutes later, Victoria left the nursery and walked straight down the hallway toward Lily's room. She stayed inside for about 3 minutes before returning to the nursery as if nothing had happened. Harold stopped the footage and sat there for a long time, realizing he had found exactly what he had been searching for. The next morning, Harold went to see Tony Russo and showed him the recording. After watching it, Tony's face went pale as he realized they might have thrown out the wrong person. The two men decided to investigate further before reporting to Gabriel because they needed proof stronger than a blurry video. Harold suggested checking pharmacies across the city to see who had purchased the sedative found in Bella's blood, and with the Moretti family's connections, that task wasn't difficult. Within 2 days, Tony had obtained a purchase receipt from a pharmacy on the outskirts of Chicago, and the name on it stunned them both, Victoria Ashford. Harold clenched the receipt in his hand and said they needed more evidence to make sure Victoria couldn't deny it. That night, Tony drove alone to Victoria's apartment while she was working an overnight shift at the hospital. He forced the back door lock and slipped inside with the practiced ease of someone who had done this kind of work hundreds of times for the Moretti family. Victoria's apartment was luxurious and perfectly ordered, but Tony knew the most careful criminals always left traces somewhere. He searched her office and found a second mobile phone hidden in a locked drawer. Tony opened it and read the messages inside, and with every message, it felt like a knife cutting into his loyalty to Gabriel, as he realized they hadn't just made a mistake, they had made a devastating one. The messages between Victoria and Derek Lawson were laid out plainly before him. From the detailed plan to frame Lily, to the money Victoria had paid Derek, to the promises she made to hand Lily over to him after she was thrown out of the mansion. Tony photographed every message and left the apartment in silence, knowing the time had come to tell Gabriel the truth, even though that truth would hurt his boss more than anything else ever had. The next morning, Harold and Tony stood outside Gabriel's study door with a thick file in their hands and faces so tense they looked as if they could be cut with a knife. Gabriel was sitting behind his desk, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes from nights without sleep. Bella and Sophia had cried endlessly since Lily was gone, and he couldn't do anything to soothe them. Harold knocked and stepped inside, placed the file on the desk in front of Gabriel, and said in a grave voice that he had served the Moretti family for 25 years and had never once dared to act against his employer's orders. But this time he had to say it. They had expelled the wrong person. Gabriel frowned at Harold in confusion and asked what he was talking about. Harold opened the file and began laying out each piece of evidence one by one. The security footage showing Victoria alone with Bella for 20 minutes, and then entering Lily's room. The pharmacy receipt for the sedative purchased under the name Victoria Ashford, and the messages between Victoria and Derek Lawson that Tony had photographed from her hidden phone. Gabriel read each page as the color drained from his face, as if the blood itself were leaving his body. His hands trembled when he reached the messages detailing how Victoria and Derek planned to frame Lily, how Victoria would poison Bella and place the blame on the innocent nanny. He read the final message in which Victoria wrote that once Lily was thrown out, Derek could do whatever he wanted to her and she wouldn't have anyone left to protect her. Gabriel sprang to his feet and hurled the file against the wall with a roar of pain that sounded as if his chest were being torn open. He shouted, demanding to know why Harold hadn't told him sooner, why he had driven Lily out into the rain when she was innocent. Harold lowered his head and said he had only just discovered the truth himself and had acted as fast as he could. Gabriel turned to Tony and ordered him in a voice colder than ice to bring Victoria there immediately. He didn't care where she was or what she was doing. She was to be dragged there by any means necessary. 2 hours later, Tony and 2 other men hauled Victoria into Gabriel's study. She was still wearing her white doctor's coat, and her face changed color when she saw the scattered files on the floor. Gabriel stood leaning against his desk with a pistol in his hand, his eyes fixed on Victoria with a hatred she had never seen before. He asked in a terrifyingly calm voice whether she wanted to explain any of this. Victoria looked down at the printed messages on the floor and knew there was no way back, but instead of fear, A manic laugh escaped her. She said yes, she had done everything. She had poisoned Bella. She had framed Lily. She had paid Derek to beat his ex-wife. And she had done it all because she loved Gabriel. She had loved him for 5 years, but he had never looked at her because his eyes were only ever for Serena, and then for that miserable little Maid. Gabriel clenched his teeth and demanded to know what she had just said about Serena. Victoria laughed even louder, her eyes wild with madness, and said, did he really want the truth? Serena hadn't died from childbirth complications like the doctors claimed. Serena had died because Victoria had been slowly poisoning her throughout her pregnancy with a drug that weakened her body over time. She had worked with Frank Castellano to do it because Frank wanted revenge on Gabriel, and she wanted to remove the only obstacle standing between her and the man she loved. Gabriel's world collapsed in that instant. He lunged forward, grabbed Victoria by the throat, and slammed her against the wall. The gun pressed straight to her head as he screamed that he would kill her, that he would kill her with his own hands for what she had done to his wife, to his daughter, to Lily. Victoria wasn't afraid. She only stared at him with a deranged smile and whispered that even if he killed her, she had already won, because she had made him lose every woman he had ever loved. Gabriel tightened his finger on the trigger, but Tony rushed in and grabbed his arm just in time, telling him that Victoria had to live. She had to live to confess every accomplice, to pay for what she had done by rotting in prison for the rest of her life, instead of dying easily here. Gabriel stood there shaking for a long time before lowering the gun. He ordered Tony to lock Victoria in the basement and notify federal authorities. He wanted her charged with every crime possible and never to see the light of day again. After Victoria was dragged away, Gabriel collapsed onto the floor and cried for the first time since Serena's death. He cried because his wife had been murdered by the very person he trusted. He cried because he had driven an innocent woman out into the rain. And he cried because he didn't know how he could ever make amends for what he had done to Lily. Gabriel drove to the hospital, where Lily was being treated that very night. He had obtained the information from the police about the assault and knew she was in room 32 on the 4th floor of the public hospital on the west side of the city. The entire drive there, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had done to her. The way he had shouted in her face in the hospital while Bella lay there. The way he had shoved her away when she knelt and begged. The way he had ordered her thrown out into the rain like a stray dog. He was Gabriel Moretti, the head of the most powerful Mafia family in Chicago. He had killed men, tortured enemies, done things so cruel they couldn't be spoken aloud, yet he had never felt such disgust toward himself as he did in that moment. When he pushed open the hospital room door, it felt as if someone were crushing his heart in their fist at the sight of Lily lying on the bed. She was so thin that the outline of her ribs showed through her skin. Her face was covered in bruises that had turned yellow and green. Her lips were swollen and stitched. One eye was still so puffy she couldn't fully open it, and her arm was in a cast, suspended against her chest. Lily opened her eyes at the sound of footsteps and froze when she saw Gabriel standing in the doorway. Her first instinct was to curl in on herself like a wounded animal trying to retreat from the one who had hurt her. Gabriel stopped in the middle of the room when he saw her reaction, his heart breaking as he realized she was afraid of him. The woman who once looked at him with warmth now looked at him as if he were a monster. He said nothing. He only walked slowly toward the bed and did something he had never done for anyone in all 36 years of his life. Gabriel Moretti knelt beside Lily's hospital bed. He bowed his head. His broad shoulders shook, and his voice broke as he said he was sorry. Lily stared at the man kneeling before her in shock beyond words. She had never imagined that the proud and ruthless Mafia boss would one day kneel before a woman like her. Gabriel went on in a trembling voice, saying he knew the truth now. He knew Victoria was the one who had poisoned Bella and framed her. He knew Lily was innocent, and he had treated her like a criminal. He had thrown her out into the rain and left her to be beaten nearly to death, and he didn't know how to atone for what he had done. Tears began streaming down Lily's face as she listened. In a hoarse voice, she asked whether Victoria had been arrested and whether Bella was all right. Gabriel nodded and said Victoria had confessed to everything and was being held awaiting trial. Bella had fully recovered, but both babies had cried endlessly since Lily left. Lily closed her eyes and broke into sobs, unsure whether she was crying from relief, from pain, or from both. Gabriel took her uninjured hand and said he wanted her to come back to the mansion. He wanted a chance to make things right, to prove he wasn't the cruel man he had shown her. Lily pulled her hand away and shook her head. She said she couldn't. She needed time. She needed to think. She didn't know if she could trust him or anyone else, after everything that had happened. Gabriel was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. He said he understood, and that he would wait. No matter how long she needed, he would wait. And in the meantime, he would do everything he could to protect her from afar. He placed a thick envelope on the bedside table and said it was money for her treatment and recovery. She didn't need to pay it back, and she shouldn't refuse, because it was the least he could do after what he had caused. He left a business card with his personal number and said that whenever she needed anything, whether in the middle of the night or at dawn, she only had to call and he would come. Before leaving, Gabriel paused at the door and looked back at her one last time. In a gentle voice she had never heard him use before, he said that no matter what she decided, he would protect her for the rest of his life, because that was his promise, and he didn't break promises. The hospital room door closed, and Lily lay there, staring up at the stark white ceiling, her hand clenched around the business card still warm from his touch. And for the first time in many days, she felt a fragile spark of hope flicker in the darkness. 1 month passed since the night Gabriel knelt beside Lily's hospital bed, and her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. After she was discharged, Lily discovered that Gabriel had bought her a small, charming house in a quiet northern suburb of Chicago, far from the slums where she once lived and also far from the Moretti mansion, giving her the space she needed to heal. The house had 2 bedrooms, a small garden filled with lavender, and a white fence around it, just like the American dream films she used to watch as a child. At first, Lily wanted to refuse, but Aunt Margaret persuaded her that this was the least Gabriel could do after everything he had caused, and that she deserved to live somewhere safe, instead of returning to a rundown apartment full of terrifying memories. Aunt Margaret moved in with Lily to care for her during her recovery, and for the first time in their lives, the 2 of them truly lived together as a family. Margaret cooked nourishing meals for Lily, helped change her bandages every day, and at night she sat by Lily's bed telling stories about Lily's mother, the sister she had lost too early and never had the chance to apologize to. Lily listened, and slowly, the wall she had built between herself and her aunt began to crack, not because she forgot the years of abuse, but because she understood that hatred only made her more exhausted, and she was already so tired. News of Victoria spread through the city like a storm. She was charged with intentional harm to children, conspiracy to commit murder, complicity in the killing of Serena Moretti, and many other crimes uncovered by federal investigators. The trial lasted 2 weeks and ended with a sentence of 25 years in prison without parole. Victoria was sent to a federal facility for dangerous female offenders, where she would grow old without ever seeing freedom again. Lily watched the trial coverage on television and felt neither joy nor satisfaction, only a strange emptiness, as if the darkest chapter of her life had finally closed. As for Derek Lawson, fate dealt him an ending no one expected. He was arrested while trying to cross the border into Mexico with the money Victoria had paid him, and he was held in Cook County Jail awaiting trial on charges of aggravated assault and extortion. But he never made it to court, because 2 weeks after his arrest, he was found dead in his cell with a stab wound through his heart. Police ruled it the result of an inmate altercation, but Lily knew that in Gabriel Moretti's world, nothing happened by chance. She didn't ask, and she didn't want to know the answer. What kept Lily from sinking into darkness during that long month of recovery were the photographs Harold sent her every day. The old butler sent pictures of Bella smiling, of Sophia reaching for toys, of the twins lying side by side sleeping peacefully after so many nights of crying for her. Harold didn't write much, just short notes with the photos, saying the babies ate better today, or Bella rolled over for the first time, or Sophia smiled when she saw the teddy bear Lily had given her. Lily saved every photo on her phone and looked at them each night before sleeping, her heart aching with longing for the 2 little angels she had loved as her own children. One weekend morning, after receiving a photo of Bella and Sophia crying until their eyes were red because they refused to drink their milk, Lily set her phone down and looked out the window where the spring sunlight spilled across the purple lavender garden. She had been turning this decision over in her mind for many nights, and that morning she knew she couldn't wait any longer. She told Aunt Margaret that she wanted to visit the babies, and Margaret nodded with a knowing smile, saying Lily should go because her heart had been there all along. Lily called Harold to let him know in advance, and the old butler couldn't hide the joy in his voice as he said the babies would be so happy to see her again and he would prepare everything. When the taxi stopped at the gates of the Moretti mansion, Lily felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it might leap from her chest. She walked through the familiar iron gates and along the stone path leading to the front door, everything looking the same yet somehow different after all that had happened. Harold greeted her at the door with a radiant smile and damp eyes, saying she looked much healthier and that he was so glad she had decided to come. He led her upstairs to the nursery, and when she pushed the door open, the sight before her made tears spill freely. Bella and Sophia were lying in their cribs, crying helplessly, while the new nanny tried to soothe them without success. But the instant Lily stepped into the room, as if by some miracle, both babies turned their heads toward her and stopped crying. Bella stared at Lily for a second, then broke into a wide smile and reached out with her tiny arms, while Sophia kicked wildly in her crib as if trying to jump out and get to her. Lily rushed to the cribs and gathered both babies into her arms, holding them tight as she sobbed like a child, whispering that she missed them so much, that she was sorry for leaving, that she wouldn't ever leave them again. Bella and Sophia lay quietly against her, their small fingers clutching her clothes as if afraid she might disappear once more, and the room filled with a piece it had been missing for an entire month. Lily didn't realize Gabriel was standing in the doorway watching the scene with reddened eyes. He had been there since she entered but hadn't dared take another step, afraid he might shatter the sacred moment. When Lily finally looked up and saw him, she didn't turn away as he feared. She simply looked at him with eyes far gentler than the last time they had met at the hospital. Gabriel asked softly if she would like to stay for lunch. Lily looked down at the two little angels resting calmly in her arms, then back at him, nodded, and said she would stay. Lunch stretched into dinner, and dinner lasted until the babies fell asleep. Gabriel asked if she wanted to stay the night so the babies wouldn't wake up and not see her, and Lily agreed because she couldn't bear to leave them while they slept so peacefully. One night turned into a week when Lily noticed that every time she prepared to leave, Bella and Sophia began to cry as if they sensed she was going. A week became 2 when Gabriel asked her to stay longer because the babies needed her, and she agreed because she needed them too. 2 weeks became a month, and Lily realized that the room she once stayed in had quietly become hers again, that her clothes had been brought back from the small house by Harold, that the babies were now used to seeing her first thing every morning and hearing her voice sing them to sleep each night. She didn't know when the Moretti mansion had become her home, but she knew she didn't want to leave it anymore. 3 months had passed since Lily returned to the Moretti mansion, and everything between her and Gabriel had changed in ways neither of them had ever anticipated. Sleepless nights caring for teething babies had turned into nights where the two of them sat side by side on the nursery sofa, shoulders touching, whispering softly so they wouldn't wake Bella and Sophia. Gabriel told Lily about his childhood, about the strict father who taught him how to become a Mafia boss from the time he was 10, about the gentle mother who died of cancer when he was 15, and how he never got to say goodbye because he was busy learning how to shoot a gun. Lily told him about the nights she cried alone in the attic of Aunt Margaret's house when she was little, about her dream of becoming a kindergarten teacher that she never got the chance to pursue, about the lullabies her mother used to sing before she died in a car accident. They shared the hidden scars of their souls that they had never shown anyone else, and without realizing it, their hearts were slowly healing one another. Gabriel began to change in ways both Harold and Tony noticed. He came home earlier each day, instead of staying at the office until midnight. He laughed more when playing with his daughters, and his gaze followed Lily with a tenderness no one had ever seen in the cold Mafia boss before. One night, when Sophia had a mild fever, and both of them stayed awake to care for her, Gabriel and Lily sat together in the armchair by the window overlooking the garden. Sophia had fallen asleep peacefully in Lily's arms after her fever broke, and Bella was sleeping soundly in her crib. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver patterns across the floor, and in that quiet space, Gabriel suddenly said he didn't know how to put this into words, because he had never been good at talking about feelings, but something inside him changed every time he was with her. Lily lifted her head and looked at him with wide eyes, asking what he meant. Gabriel took a deep breath as if preparing for the most important battle of his life, and said that he had loved Serena. He had mourned her, and he thought he would never be able to love anyone again. But then Lily came into his life and changed everything. He said he didn't deserve her after all the things he had done, and he knew that. But he couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop wanting to protect her, couldn't stop wanting to see her smile every morning when he woke up. Lily sat in silence for a long moment, her heart pounding wildly. Unsure how to respond to such an unexpected confession, she said in a trembling voice that she was afraid. Afraid to trust again and be betrayed. Afraid to love again and be hurt. That she had suffered too much, and didn't know if she still had the courage to open her heart to anyone. Gabriel reached out and gently touched her cheek, saying he understood, that he wouldn't rush her or pressure her, that he just wanted her to know he was here, he would always be here, and he was willing to wait no matter how long she needed. Lily looked into his eyes that had once been cold as ice but were now warm and sincere, and she realized her heart had belonged to this man for a long time, even though she hadn't dared admit it. She whispered that she was afraid too, but what she feared most was losing the chance to be happy again, because she was too afraid to try. Then, beneath the gentle silver moonlight, Gabriel leaned down and placed a soft butterfly kiss on her lips. Their first kiss wasn't passionate or fiery like in the movies. It was gentle and tentative, filled with fear and hope, like two wounded souls daring to trust again. When they pulled apart, tears streamed down both their faces. But they were tears of happiness, of healing, of love blooming from the ashes of the past. Just then, a tiny voice rose from the crib, making them both turn in surprise. Bella had woken up and was staring at Lily with wide eyes. Then she opened her mouth and babbled a word that both Gabriel and Lily heard clearly. "Mama." Lily froze as if struck by lightning, tears pouring freely as she rushed to the crib and lifted Bella into her arms, asking through sobs what she had just said and what she had called her. Bella looked at her and repeated it again. "Mama," then broke into a proud grin. Gabriel stood behind Lily and wrapped his arms around the two most important women in his life, whispering in her ear that to his daughters, she had always been their mother, from the very first day she held them in her arms. Lily and Gabriel's happiness lasted only 2 weeks before the darkness of the underworld crashed in once again, shattering that fragile peace. One afternoon, while Lily was playing with Bella and Sophia in the garden, her phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number, and when she answered, a cold male voice said that if she wanted to see her aunt alive, she was to tell Gabriel Moretti to bring $5 million to the abandoned warehouse at the southern docks at midnight, alone. Lily froze as if struck by lightning and asked in a trembling voice who they were and where her aunt was. The voice on the other end let out a dry laugh and said they were what remained of the Castellano family, and they were going to make Gabriel Moretti pay for destroying their boss and handing Victoria over to the police. The call ended with Margaret's scream of pain, and Lily collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Gabriel rushed into the garden when he heard, and pulled Lily into his arms as she shook with fear, promising her he would save Margaret at any cost, and that anyone who dared touch his family would pay a price far greater than they could imagine. That night, Gabriel summoned the full force of the Moretti family for an emergency meeting in his office. Tony Russo stood beside him with his gun already loaded, surrounded by 20 of the family's most loyal men, all of them willing to die for their boss. Gabriel said they wanted him to come alone, but he wasn't a fool. He would arrive on time with the money, while Tony's team surrounded the warehouse in advance and waited for his signal to strike. Before he left, Lily gripped Gabriel's hand, looking into his eyes red and swollen from crying, begging him to be careful and to come back to her and the children because she couldn't lose him. Gabriel kissed her forehead and whispered that he would come back. He promised. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. The abandoned warehouse at the southern docks was a rusted, decaying building, reeking of garbage and seawater. And Gabriel walked inside alone with the suitcase of cash, while Tony's team lay in wait around the perimeter. Inside, Margaret was tied to a chair with tape over her mouth, surrounded by 8 heavily armed men, and leading them was a large man with a long scar across his face, a former right hand of Frank Castellano, whom Gabriel recognized immediately. The scarred man sneered and said Gabriel Moretti had finally shown up, that he had been waiting for this day since Gabriel killed his boss. Gabriel set the suitcase on the floor and said in a voice cold as ice that the money was there and they should release her. The scarred man shook his head and said he had changed his mind, that he didn't just want the money, he wanted Gabriel's life to avenge Frank Castellano. Then he ordered his men to shoot. Before they could fire, Gabriel shouted the signal, and the warehouse doors were blown open as Tony's team stormed in from every direction. Gunfire thundered through the confined space, bullets flying like rain and blood spilling freely. Gabriel rolled to avoid the shots and drew his weapon, dropping 2 men who rushed toward Margaret, then ran to her and cut her restraints while Tony covered him from behind. A bullet tore through Gabriel's left shoulder, dropping him to one knee, but he gritted his teeth through the pain and kept pulling Margaret toward the exit. The scarred man charged with a knife, roaring that he would kill Gabriel with his own hands, but Tony appeared behind him and fired 3 shots into his back, sending him face down into a pool of blood. The fight ended after 15 minutes, with all 8 Castellano men dead or gravely wounded. Gabriel's team lost 2 men and several others were injured, but they had won. Tony helped Gabriel to his feet and rushed him to the car, while another man supported Margaret. Gabriel's shoulder was still bleeding, but he refused to go to the hospital and ordered them to drive straight back to the mansion because he had promised Lily he would return. When the car pulled up to the gates of the Moretti mansion at 3 a.m, Lily was waiting at the front door, her face soaked with tears, and her eyes swollen from hours of crying. She ran out when she saw Gabriel step from the car with his left arm roughly bandaged and his shirt stained with blood, throwing her arms around him and sobbing like a child, repeating that she had been so afraid, that she thought she had lost him, that she didn't know what she would have done if he hadn't come back. Gabriel held her with his uninjured arm and whispered that he had promised he would return, and he never broke his promises to her. Then he kissed her hair and said that from now on, no one would ever be able to harm his family again, because he had completely destroyed the last remnants of the Castellano family. Margaret was brought inside and treated by the family's private doctor. She was badly shaken and bruised, but her life wasn't in danger. And when Lily held her and cried, apologizing for putting her in danger, Margaret only shook her head and said Lily wasn't at fault, that she was simply grateful they were both still alive. 6 months had passed since the blood-soaked night at the dockside warehouse, and life inside the Moretti mansion had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Gabriel had handed over most of the family business to Tony so he could spend more time with his family. The wound in his shoulder had healed completely, and only a small scar remained, as a reminder of the night he almost lost everything. Bella and Sophia were now learning to walk, toddling through the house with clear laughter, calling Mama every time they saw Lily. Aunt Margaret had fully recovered and moved into the small house Gabriel had bought for Lily earlier, and she often came to the mansion to visit her niece and the 2 adopted great-grandchildren she loved as her own blood. Bella and Sophia's first birthday was celebrated in the large garden behind the mansion with fresh flowers, balloons, and a giant cake shaped like 2 teddy bears. There were not many guests, because Gabriel wanted it to be an intimate family gathering. Just Harold, Tony, Aunt Margaret, and a few of the closest people in the family. Lily wore a simple white dress, and her hair was pinned up, revealing her slender neck. She held Sophia in her arms, while Bella was being guided across the green grass by Gabriel. When everyone gathered around the table to sing the birthday song, Gabriel suddenly stepped into the center and asked for everyone's attention because he had something important to say. Lily looked at him in surprise, not understanding what was happening, and her breath caught when Gabriel slowly went down on one knee in front of her and took a small red velvet box from his jacket. He opened it to reveal a diamond ring sparkling in the afternoon sun, and looked into Lily's eyes, his voice trembling with emotion as he said that he had lived 36 years thinking he knew what strength meant. But she had taught him that true strength wasn't about how many people you could kill or how much money you could make. It was about daring to love again after being hurt, daring to trust again after being betrayed. He said she had saved his daughters. She had saved him, and he couldn't imagine what his life would be like without her. He asked if she would become his wife, if she would truly become Bella and Sophia's mother, and if she would stay by his side for the rest of their lives. Lily stood there with tears streaming down her face, Sophia in her arms staring at her father with wide, curious eyes, while Bella tried to run toward her mother and stumbled on the grass. Lily couldn't find her voice, her throat tight with emotion. She could only nod again and again as she whispered yes so softly it was barely more than a breath. Gabriel stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and pulled Lily and Sophia into his arms as Bella ran over to hug their legs. And the small family stood together, surrounded by applause and joyful cheers. Harold stood in one corner of the garden with his familiar notebook, wiping his eyes with a white handkerchief before writing a single line that said on the 12th of June, Mr. Gabriel Moretti proposed to Miss Lily Carter, and she accepted. This was the happiest day he had witnessed in 25 years of serving the Moretti family. 3 months after the sun-filled proposal in the garden, the wedding of Gabriel Moretti and Lily Carter was held in the very place where they had exchanged their promises. The mansion garden was adorned with thousands of white roses and flowing silk ribbons, a red carpet stretching from the front door to the floral arch where Gabriel stood waiting for his bride, his heart pounding uncontrollably. Lily stepped out from the mansion in a pure white wedding gown, holding a bouquet of deep red roses, her hair swept up with soft strands framing her face. Aunt Margaret walked beside her, tears shimmering in her eyes as she watched her niece finally find a place of peace after so many years of suffering. What made everyone smile was the sight of the 2 tiny flower girls, Bella and Sophia, toddling ahead in fluffy pink dresses, scattering petals everywhere with unsteady enthusiasm. As Lily approached the floral arch, Bella suddenly turned around, looked at her, and shouted Mama so loudly it echoed through the garden, while Sophia quickly turned toward Gabriel and called out Baba in her clear little voice. Laughter rippled through the guests as Lily and Gabriel looked at each other with tear-filled eyes, overwhelmed with happiness. The ceremony was simple yet deeply meaningful, as they vowed to love and protect each other for the rest of their lives, to raise Bella and Sophia into kind and compassionate people, and to never let anything separate them again. When Gabriel kissed his bride beneath the white arch, Harold stood in the front row with the notebook he had carried for 25 years, writing that today he witnessed his master reclaim happiness and that the Moretti mansion had finally found a worthy lady of the house. 1 year after the wedding, Lily stood by the bedroom window looking out at the garden where Gabriel was chasing Bella and Sophia across the grass, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly where their first child was growing. Gabriel had officially stepped away from all underworld activity and handed the entire Moretti empire to Tony Russo, saying he had more than enough wealth for several lifetimes and didn't want his children to grow up in darkness as he had. They still lived in the Moretti mansion, but it was no longer a mafia stronghold. It had become a family home where children's laughter replaced gunfire and schemes. Far away in a federal prison for female inmates, Victoria Ashford sat in her narrow cell, watching a news broadcast on an old television showing images from Gabriel and Lily's wedding 1 year earlier. She saw the happiness on the face of the man she had once loved obsessively, the tenderness in his eyes as he looked at the woman she had hated with every fiber of her being, and she understood that she had lost everything. She would grow old within those walls, never seeing freedom again, all because blind jealousy had destroyed her life and nearly destroyed the lives of the innocent. Lily stood there watching her small family, her heart filled with gratitude. She had once believed her life would be forever trapped in darkness after losing her parents, after years of abuse by her aunt, after a hellish marriage with Derek, and after losing the son she never had the chance to hold. But fate had given her a second chance, had led her to Bella and Sophia, had brought Gabriel into her life, and had taught her that happiness sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. She had found her family not through blood, but through love, and that was what mattered most. This story reminds us that no matter how dark life becomes, as long as we don't give up hope and keep a kind heart, happiness will find its way to us. It also reminds us that family isn't only about shared blood, but about those who are willing to love and protect us no matter what. Most importantly, it shows us that forgiveness and trust can heal even the deepest wounds of the soul. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your loved ones so we can spread these values together. We'd truly love to hear how you felt about Lily and Gabriel's journey, and whether it reminded you of something in your own life. So please leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. We appreciate every thought you share. Wishing all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with love. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video.